My name is Adeline. I'm 36 years old, currently head nurse of the pediatric department at a large hospital in Chicago. I'm the mother of two little girls, Lily, 11, and Harper, 9 good kids, smart in school, and always thoughtful of others. After a draining divorce, I moved back into my parents' home with the hope of regaining some stability for a while. I never imagined that decision would drag us into a nightmare lasting more than 2 years. That night, at my mother's 60th birthday party, with more than 50 guests, relatives, and old colleagues filling the large hall, I sat quietly with my two daughters at the last table. No one paid us any attention, no one struck up a conversation. When it was time for speeches, my mother stood up, raised her glass, smiled proudly, and turned to the crowd. We've decided that Lily and Harper's room will go to our grandson Henry. Starting today, the girls will move down to the basement. The room went silent. Before anyone could make sense of it, I turned my head and froze. Toys, books, even the blanket Lily hugged every night, all of it had already been moved quietly into the basement without me knowing. Have you ever been disregarded by your own family? Have you ever watched your children be treated like outsiders in what's supposed to be their home? Share your thoughts in the comments if you've ever felt you or your kids were pushed aside simply because you weren't the chosen ones. Hit like and subscribe if you want to hear the full story, because what happened after that party will be beyond belief. And from that very moment, I realized I could no longer stay silent. I stood frozen in the room, music blaring, lights shining, but everything blurred before my eyes. Lily sat motionless, eyes wide open, while Harper gripped the edge of the table, her small jaw tight. None of the guests said a word, no one objected. They simply looked away or bent over their cake, avoiding my gaze as if it didn't concern them. My throat went dry, no warning, not a single question for me, even though I am still their legal mother and the one covering most of the household expenses. They had done it behind my back. They had rearranged my children's lives as though they had no voice, no need for my consent. And the cruelest part, it came from my own mother, the woman I thought I could lean on after my marriage collapsed. I pushed back my chair. No loud clatter, just a faint sound, cold as the air around the table. Lily, Harper, come with me, I said quietly. They rose immediately, without questions, without protest. Perhaps they too felt something had broken beyond repair. As we walked toward the door, I heard my mother's heels clicking behind me. Adeline, don't make a scene in front of the family. This is just temporary, until Brandon finishes his house. You don't want to ruin your mother's birthday, do you? I stopped, turned, and kept my voice steady. Why didn't you ask me first? Why didn't you ask Lily and Harper? Her brow furrowed, and she smoothed her hair as if hiding her unease. Because I thought you'd understand. Henry's a baby, he needs more space. The girls are older now, the basement will be fine for them. Harper squeezed my hand tighter. Lily lifted her head to look at her grandmother. Her eyes were no longer wet, only hollow. I knew that look. It was the look of a child who realizes they were never the one chosen. I didn't answer my mother. I simply turned and walked out of the party, my daughters beside me, passing rows of strangers I once called family. No one stopped us. Not one hand reached out, not a word of protest against my mother's cruel decision. Our car was parked a block away. On the drive back, I didn't speak. Neither did the girls. In the rearview mirror, I saw Harper staring out the window and Lily leaning her head against the door, clutching the worn stuffed bunny I had given her on her 3rd birthday. The house appeared through the old trees, yellow light spilling from the living room where my father usually watched TV with the volume too high. Brandon and Rachel had moved in a week earlier, claiming plumbing issues. Rachel was pregnant with their 2nd child. Brandon still hadn't finished paying off the debt from his failed restaurant, and last I heard, he was using our parents' money for some shady real estate project. When we arrived, I saw Lily and Harper's bedroom wide open, stripped bare, closets empty, bookshelves cleared. dust left behind. I ran down to the basement. The old bunk bed once stored in the garage had been shoved into a corner of the dim room. Boxes of toys were dumped carelessly to the side, shipping labels still stuck on. Their blankets and pillows were piled on the bare concrete floor. The room was so cold I shivered even in my coat. I went back upstairs. My mother stood in the kitchen, dropping ice cubes into a cocktail glass, as if everything was reasonable. "This is for the best, Adeline," she said without looking up. "You shouldn't let emotions override logic." I couldn't believe it. Emotions? These are my children, your grandchildren. And you think putting them in a damp basement is reasonable? She sighed. "They still have beds to sleep on. Don't act like I threw them out on the street. They're people, Mom, not boxes you can move around at will." My voice cracked. My father appeared from the living room, leaning against the doorway. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Brandon's under pressure, his wife's about to have a baby. Sharing space temporarily isn't a big deal." I looked at them, no longer recognizing the faces I once trusted. They didn't see the injustice. Or worse, they saw it and didn't care. I turned to my daughters at the staircase. Harper's arms wrapped around Lily from behind. I spoke softly. "We won't be staying here much longer." "Where will we go, Mom?" Lily asked quietly. I saw fear plain on her face, clearer than I had in months. I couldn't give her an answer right then, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let them live another day in a place where they were treated as less. I had endured, working 12-hour shifts at the hospital to save for a small apartment, swallowing every moment of favoritism toward Brandon just to keep the peace. But the cost of my silence was the pain in my daughter's eyes at that party, Harper's sobs in the car as I buckled her seatbelt, and I realized it could not go on. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not for work, but because I hadn't slept. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny basement window, where sunlight barely filtered through the old curtain. Lily and Harper were still asleep, curled in their blankets, their little faces lost in that cold, damp space. My heart twisted. Upstairs, I brewed a strong cup of coffee, more to delay than to wake. On the dining table, new frames had appeared without me noticing. Henry's pictures were everywhere on the wall, on the shelves, even replacing the old family portrait above the fireplace. I stopped in front of the largest frame. Henry, grinning, wrapped in a cream-colored blanket. Underneath, embroidered words read, "The pride of his grandparents." I stood there for a long time, the chill in my chest sharper than the cold of the basement where my girls slept. From the kitchen came the clink of dishes. Rachel appeared, holding Henry in one arm, a bottle in the other. She wore silk pajamas, hair in a neat bun, makeup soft as though she'd stepped out of a magazine. "Good morning," she said, as if nothing had happened the night before. I nodded slightly. "Did Henry sleep well?" Rachel smiled. "Perfectly. He only woke once around 3 a.m. Brandon had him back to sleep in 5 minutes. An angel baby, really." I didn't answer. I was thinking of Harper, who had woken in the night, shivering at the sound of wind whistling through the basement cracks, trembling even in her sweater. "Oh, did you see the new frame?" Rachel gestured toward the portrait above the fireplace. "Your parents picked it. They said this house finally has a grandson to carry on the family name." Her words fell light, but they struck like a stone to my chest. "I have 2 daughters." Rachel chuckled softly, not meeting my eyes. "Yes, you do, but you know how at Island, this family has always valued sons." I don't know how I kept my calm. Maybe because I was too tired, or maybe because my heart had already hardened after months of pretending not to notice. The house where I grew up no longer bore any trace of Lily and Harper. Lily's drawings once pinned to the hallway were gone, replaced by Henry in a knit cap. Harper's summer science model shoved into storage, replaced with a walker and a baby swing. The living room had become a mini playroom filled with pastel rugs and tents. Lily was no longer allowed to read in the living room at night. Harper couldn't build her STEM projects because they took up too much space. Even family meals had turned into showcases for Henry. Henry just rolled over for the first time. My mother gushed with excitement. 9 weeks old and already rolling. Brandon was just the same. The boy is truly gifted. I was ladling soup for Harper when I heard it. Harper froze, spoon suspended midair. She just won the school's science fair, Mom, I spoke up. She programmed a robot to move using light sensors. Her teacher says she has real research potential. My mother gave a faint smile. That's fine. But kids these days all learn that kind of thing early. The words poured over us like cold water. I glanced at Harper. She lowered her head to her plate, quietly chewing dry bread. After dinner, I went to the room, or what used to be the girls' room, to gather a few things. On the floor lay a scrap of paper Lily had once taped to the wall. It showed a room with a starry sky, an open window, and two little girls reading together. I picked it up, pencil lines still clear, the clumsy but loving strokes of her hand. This is my dream room, Lily had once told me. I clenched the paper in my hand, then smoothed it again and slipped it into my pocket. I can't change how my parents love Henry. I can't force them to treat my daughters fairly if fairness was never their standard. But there is something I can change. I didn't know exactly what my plan would look like, but I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't let my daughters endure this much longer. I went back down to the basement where Harper was bent over tying her shoelaces. Lily was taping together one of her ripped drawings. She looked up as I stepped in. Can I hang this back up here, Mom? It got torn when they moved our room. I knelt down and took the picture from her hands. Go ahead and hang it. But soon, we'll find a better place for it. Somewhere it truly belongs. Lily didn't ask anything. She just nodded softly and smiled. Her eyes weren't as sad as the night before, but in that silence, I knew she was still waiting for something to change. I came home still in my nurse's uniform, carrying the smell of disinfectant and sweat after a 13-hour shift. That day, the hospital had 3 pediatric emergencies and 1 newborn who needed intensive care. I barely had time for lunch. But physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the heaviness of walking into a house where the people inside no longer treated us like family. Lily sat at the kitchen table with her sketchbook open, her hand trembling slightly as she held a colored pencil. Harper stood next to her, holding a smooth sheet of paper that read, "Second place, School Science and Technology Fair, Harper, Montgomery." I took off my mask, set my bag on the shelf, and walked toward them. "What's going on, girls?" Harper said nothing. Lily didn't look up, just pointed to the trash can beside her. Inside was Harper's congratulatory letter from school, along with a copy of her certificate, crumpled, coffee-stained, tossed away. "Grandma said it was just kids' stuff," Harper whispered, her voice flat. "She said she was busy picking a new frame for Henry's photo from yesterday." I glanced at Lily's sketchbook. She was redrawing one of her pieces that had once been chosen for a statewide student art exhibition. She was redrawing it because the original had been folded in half and shoved under a pile of utility bills on my father's desk. I took a deep breath. "Lily, what did your teacher say about the exhibition?" She lifted her head, her voice barely a breeze. "She said my painting was selected. They want to hang it in the main hall in Madison next month. Do you want to go?" Lily nodded, then looked down again. "I do, but I heard Grandma say we'd have to bring Henry too, because we can't leave him for a weekend." I didn't say anything, just placed my hand gently on her shoulder. I had once thought that if I worked hard enough, if my girls were good enough, if we didn't cause trouble, the balance in this house would fix itself. But I was wrong. I remembered the night before. After finishing my night shift, I stopped by a small bakery near the hospital to buy a little cake to celebrate Harper's win. I decorated it myself with chocolate icing, writing her name on top, and placed it in the fridge, planning a special breakfast the next morning. But when I opened the fridge the next day, the cake had been shoved to the back, almost pressed against the wall. Front and center was a freshly baked, bear-shaped cake with the name Henry, 6 months old, written in bright frosting. No one asked who the other cake was for. No one asked Harper if she was happy about beating more than 120 students in her school competition. My father sat by the fireplace reading the paper. When I handed him Harper's certificate, he barely glanced at it before saying, "Good." But Henry clapped yesterday. At 6 months old, that kind of reflex is rare. I didn't react. Not because I wasn't angry, but because I had taught myself to swallow it. To swallow for the sake of peace, to save every dollar for a plan to move out, to keep my daughters from worrying. But while I swallowed my anger, my girls were shrinking bit by bit, withdrawing from a world that should have been warm and safe. Harper had stopped reading aloud at night. Instead, she lay quietly with headphones, listening to audiobooks so she wouldn't disturb Henry's sleep. Lily no longer pinned her drawings to the basement walls. She tucked them all away in a cardboard box, tied shut with ribbon from an old birthday gift. That evening, as I washed dishes, I heard Rachel's voice from the living room. "Henry's learning to wave now. So smart. I never thought my child would develop so quickly." My mother clapped and laughed. "Brandon was just the same," he said his first words at 11 months. Exactly like Henry now. I stood still at the sink, hands dripping, mind flashing to Harper explaining her homemade water filter design to her class, or Lily carefully sketching floral patterns inspired by indigenous symbols. None of it seemed to matter to my parents unless it was tied to Brandon or Henry. Later that night, I sat beside Harper. "Sweetheart, what did your teacher say about your award?" Her eyes lit up a little. "She said I could go far in science if I keep working hard. She even recommended me for a summer science camp in Iowa." "And do you want to go?" Harper nodded instantly. I turned to Lily. "What about your art show? Do you need me to go with you?" She thought for a moment, then said softly, "I want you there, but if you can't, I'll bring your picture with me." My throat tightened. I used to think I had more time, that just a few more months of saving would make things better. But seeing how my children were learning to accept invisibility, I realized they were learning silence, and I could not let that become the default for their lives. I pushed aside the dishes, pulled my laptop closer, and opened the budget spreadsheet I updated every night after work. The numbers weren't enough yet, but they were getting close. If I picked up 3 extra weekend shifts a month, cut non-essential expenses, and asked my friend Monica to show me a few small apartments near the hospital, I could make it work. Not much longer, just a little more. I looked at my daughters and felt a wave of resolve I didn't need to speak aloud. They deserved a home where their names weren't replaced on the walls by someone else's pictures. A place where their achievements weren't dismissed just because they weren't the most spoiled children in the family. I would give them that. Not with promises, but with action. When Brandon announced his house needed major plumbing repairs, my mother didn't hesitate. "Move in with us, there's plenty of room," she offered. I was washing dishes when I heard it from the living room. The glass slipped in my soapy hands, almost crashing into the sink. I looked up, catching Brandon's glance as he quickly turned away. Rachel just smiled. That familiar smirk, something between politeness and possession. "Only 6 to 8 weeks," Rachel said later as we rearranged the fridge after dinner. "The repair company promised it'd be done before Thanksgiving. Henry won't be a bother, we'll respect your space." Won't be a bother. I recalled every time she had said that. When she used the living room sofa as a changing station. When she pushed Harper's food off the table, saying the smell wasn't good for the baby. When she pumped breast milk in the living room during my break and told me, You can take your calls outside. Within a week, Henry had his own room, the room that used to belong to Lily and Harper. My girls weren't sent to the basement because of lack of space, but because Brandon and Rachel claimed Henry needed room to develop. I objected, quietly, firmly. I chose to speak directly to my mother. Mom, my girls are living in a damp basement, while their own room has been given to a baby who already has a crib next to his parents. She didn't look at me, eyes fixed on the papers in front of her. You're too sensitive, Adeline. The girls are at school all day. Sleeping is all they need. Henry needs space during the day. You know how fragile babies are. I stood there, swallowing all the words I wanted to say. The whole house began to orbit around Henry's schedule. In the mornings, I had to wake Lily by whispering in her ear because my mother had hung a sign on the stair rail. Do not disturb, Henry sleeping. Harper couldn't study outside her bedroom because the sound of turning pages was said to disturb the baby. One afternoon, I came home to find Lily slumped at the end of the hall, head resting on her notebook. Why aren't you in your room? Aunt Rachel is putting Henry down for a nap. Grandma told me to shut my door, but my room doesn't have one, remember? I knelt beside her, wiping sweat from her brow. The house had never felt small before, but now, the space my daughters had was only what was left between restrictions and reprimands. That night, Harper hesitated between her toy box and her math board. What's wrong, sweetheart? Aunt Rachel said there'll be guests tonight. Grandma said our stuff takes up too much space. I looked around. My girls' toys were stacked neatly in a corner. But in the middle of the living room were a walker, a portable crib, padded mats, and an electric swing playing lullabies. The next morning, I spoke to Rachel. Is there any way to adjust things so my girls' routines aren't disrupted so much? She sighed, putting on her understanding face. I'm a mom too, Adeline, I get it. But Henry's so little. I have to prioritize him. Older kids need to be more flexible. I didn't respond. I knew if I did, everything I said would be twisted into the narrative of a jealous, bitter sister. I began taking extra night shifts, partly for the money, partly to avoid the suffocating tension in the place that was supposed to be home. But every time I came home early, I discovered something new. Breakfast replaced with instant cereal because Rachel used the stove for Henry's purees. Lily's online piano lessons canceled because Henry needs quiet for his hearing development. Harper banned from doing small experiments in the bathroom because chemicals might harm Henry. One night, Lily crawled into bed beside me, her voice as soft as falling leaves. Mom, did I do something wrong? I pulled her into my arms. No, sweetheart. Why would you think that? Grandma said I should learn to be more considerate. But I only asked to read my book. I had no answer. I just stroked her hair, heart heavy as stone. The next morning, Harper handed me a note from her teacher. She said I've been distracted lately. She asked if something's wrong at home. The handwriting leaned slightly, careful but concerned. Harper shows mild stress, startles easily, less social interaction. Parents should monitor closely. I folded the note, placed it carefully in my pocket, and in my head, only one thought echoed. Enough. Not because I hadn't tried, but because my children were losing their childhood piece by piece, just to keep peace with people who never truly saw them. My mother's 60th birthday party was held in the grand banquet hall of her favorite Italian restaurant. The air warm and elegant, candles glowing, the soft notes of a violin filling the corners of the room, as if everything had been staged for a flawless evening. Guests gathered in full relatives from both sides, and even a few of my father's old colleagues from his years in tax service. I arrived a little late because I had to stay at the hospital until nearly 6 p.m. As soon as I stepped into the banquet hall, I saw Brandon and Rachel already seated at the center table, with Henry lying in a velvet-lined cradle placed right next to my mother's chair. The whole party seemed to orbit around the baby congratulations, adoring glances, and the constant chorus of, "Oh, he's so cute," every time he moved. I led Lily and Harper to the family table at the edge of the room, near the kitchen. The girls wore dresses I had chosen myself, their hair neatly tied back, new shoes clicking softly against the polished wood floor. No one in the family turned to look when we arrived. Not a single question, not a single compliment. Just fleeting glances, as though we were late guests no one had been expecting. Dinner passed under a strange cloud. I served salad to Lily and spooned soup for Harper. They ate quietly, trying to be proper, though every so often my mother's disapproving eyes cut across the room whenever Harper dropped her fork or Lily laughed out loud. I thought I could stay silent all night, that if I kept quiet, the party would end without incident. But I had miscalculated. When the cake was brought out and the lights dimmed, everyone rose to toast. My mother stepped forward, microphone in hand, with a formality I rarely saw. "I'm so happy tonight to see everyone here, the people I love most. And I'm even happier to share something very important with the family." My chest tightened. "We've decided to make a small adjustment at home to better suit our circumstances," she smiled. "Starting this week, Lily and Harper's room will go to our grandson Henry, so he has the best environment to grow. The girls will move to the basement. It's only temporary, but I believe with love, everything will be fine." The room sank into a strange silence. The clink of a fork against a glass froze midair. Someone coughed in the distance. Brandon's smile betrayed his satisfaction, while Rachel stroked Henry's hair as though shielding her little angel from the tension. I turned to Lily. Her face was paling, her eyes wide with confusion. Harper looked at me, then snapped her head toward my mother. "Are you serious?" Her voice rang clear in the hushed room. My mother frowned. "Harper, don't interrupt adults. You need to learn manners." "I am being polite," Harper said, trembling but firm. "But I have the right to ask why we're being sent down where there are mice and mold." Whispers rippled across the tables. An aunt murmured to her husband. Another covered her mouth with her hand. A few gasps of, "Oh my God," escaped here and there. Lily broke into tears. She tried to hide her face in her napkin, but I saw her small shoulders shaking. I wrapped my arms around her and pulled Harper close. Across from me, my mother's gaze stayed steady, unshaken. "Adeline," she said, voice flat as though reading from a prepared statement, "you're their mother. You need to teach them respect. This is a reasonable decision, good for the whole family. Henry is an infant. He needs special care." I tightened my hand on Harper's shoulder. She was breathing fast, tears pooling in her eyes, yet she forced herself to stand tall. I rose to my feet. "Excuse us," I said, looking straight at my mother. "This party is no longer about family. And perhaps that house isn't a family home anymore either." "What are you doing?" she snapped. "Don't cause a scene here." I bent down, helping Lily to her feet, then took Harper's hand. "I'm not causing a scene. I'm protecting my children from being trampled in the place that should be their home." Brandon let out a mocking laugh. "God, another performance." I met his eyes. "No, this isn't a performance. It's goodbye." I turned and led my daughters through the stairs, curious, pitying, disapproving, silent. No one stopped us. No one asked if we were okay. I heard Brandon's footsteps behind me, his low voice reaching my ears. "I told you not to announce it so soon. You ruined the whole mood." "I thought your sister would tolerate it longer," my mother replied. I gripped my daughter's hands tighter, not once looking back. Their words followed us out of the hall, across the wind-swept parking lot, cutting into me like the coldest air of that autumn. Lily sobbed quietly. Harper's grip on my hand turned her knuckles white. I opened the car door, settled them in the back seat, then sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel, frozen. "Mom!" Lily's small voice came from behind me. Where are we going? I looked in the rearview mirror, meeting her clear, weary, hopeful eyes. To a place where you'll never be treated like you don't belong, I said softly but firmly. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, the wind lashing against the windshield. Lily had stopped crying but curled into the corner of her seat, staring out at the night. Harper leaned her head against the seat back, clutching her backpack like someone might take it away. I didn't ask if they were okay. That question was no longer necessary. I just gripped the wheel tighter and steered us toward the familiar roads, where streetlights spilled over shuttered houses. Tonight, we weren't going back to the old house. I had already decided. I turned into a quiet neighborhood behind the hospital, where maples had begun to shed their leaves across the sidewalks. A small gray house appeared under the glow of a warm porch light. Not large, not new, but mine at least for the next 6 months, according to the lease I had signed 3 weeks earlier. I shut off the engine and looked back at my girls, still dazed. Lily, Harper, I said calmly, this is our new home. Harper frowned. New home? Yes, I nodded. I've been preparing for a while. I just didn't expect we'd move this soon. Lily's eyes widened. When did you know we needed to leave? I smiled, not sad, not angry. When you told me you were scared to open your bookshelf. When Harper stopped doing her experiments because she was afraid of the noise. And when I heard you ask if you'd done something wrong. I stepped out, helped them from the car, and we stood at the porch. The green curtains inside glowed under soft yellow light against bare walls. I turned the key and opened the door. There wasn't much inside. Just the essentials I had quietly moved earlier. 2 twin mattresses, an old desk Monica had given me, a few folding chairs, and the kitchen supplies I'd been collecting for months. I led them to the small bedroom at the end of the hall. On the walls were pictures I had already taped up, the 3 of us on a picnic, Lily holding her award-winning painting, Harper with her recycled materials robot. How long will we stay here? Harper asked softly. Long enough for you to do your experiments without anyone stopping you, I answered. Lily sat on her mattress looking around. It's so quiet here, Mom. I stroked her hair. Quiet, but not lonely. We have each other. Once they had changed and settled down to rest, I walked back to the living room and pulled from my bag the folder I had hidden for weeks. I opened it, scanning the signed papers, the brokerage stamp, and the certificate confirming ownership of shares in a real estate project on the west side of the city. Project name, Pine Oak Residences. Developer, Alliance Property Group. Under the shareholder list, Adeline Montgomery, 12% ownership. I leaned on the table, inhaling deeply. No one in my family would ever believe that I, the woman they called dependent, had quietly bought into a project my own brother had abandoned after sinking into debt. Brandon had called it a sinking ship, pulling out halfway after burning through his entire bank loan, leaving over $300,000 in debt. But I, through an old colleague in finance, had quietly purchased the shares from a broker desperate to cut losses, using all my savings plus a small loan from the hospital's employee support fund. It wasn't about beating Brandon. It was about giving myself an escape and a chance. I hadn't told anyone, not even Monica. For months, I had worked in silence, counting every dollar, studying every detail. I had read nearly the entire rollout plan, learned how to read cash flow reports, and studied risk ratios with help from a friend in the hospital's accounting department. Every night after my shift, I took notes, calculated, and prepared for the moment I knew would inevitably come. I looked around the modest house that, just hours earlier, had felt impossible. No velvet sofas, no antique dining tables, no warm fireplace. But it had something else. Freedom, Lily's laughter waiting to spill out, Harper's faith flickering to life. I went to the girls' room, closed the door softly, then sat on the floor with my back against the wall. In my hands was the share contract, the first asset I had built entirely from my own effort and resolve. I didn't know if it would make me wealthy, but I knew one thing for certain: from now on, I would not live on anyone's pity. And my daughters would grow up in a home where their worth wasn't measured by their place in the family tree or a photo on the wall. I closed my eyes, letting the steady breathing of my children on the other side of the wall soothe me. Tonight, no one told them to stay quiet because Henry was sleeping. No one shoved their toys aside for guests. No one forced them out of their room because they weren't the grandson to carry the name. Tonight, I didn't need permission to live as a real mother. The next morning, I called Monica as soon as the first sunlight streamed through the small window of our new house. Her voice, still touched with sleep, carried no annoyance. "You okay?" Monica asked quickly. No preamble. "I'm fine, but the girls need more rest. I'll bring them over tonight if you're still willing," I said, clutching the phone while watching Lily sketch at the table. "Of course I'm willing," Monica answered firmly. "The kids need their own space, and you need real sleep. I've got the guest room ready. Say no more." I managed only a thank you before hanging up, trying to steady my voice. All those years I had endured silence in my parents' house, swallowing every slight, and yet that friend had stood quietly behind me all along, without explanations, without judgment. I packed a few sets of clothes and the essentials for the three of us, leaving the rest of our belongings in the rental house we had just moved into. For now, I needed a safe enough stopover, a calm place to gather myself, a place where my children could regain balance after a week of upheaval. When I opened the car trunk to load things, Harper came out carrying her old backpack that had been with her through 3 school years. "What are you bringing so much for?" I asked, gently holding her hand. "I packed all of Lily's drawings and my robot kit." "You said not to let anyone take them away again," Harper replied, then lifted her eyes. "I don't want to leave anything behind." I nodded slightly, saying nothing more. We arrived at Monica's house as dusk was settling in. Her small, cream-colored home nestled beside a row of old cedars, warm light spilling from the windows, calming me the moment I stepped onto the porch. Monica opened the door, still in her loose pajamas, hair tied up in a messy bun. "Come in." "No need for formalities," she said, pulling me into a short but warm hug. Lily and Harper rushed after Monica into the house, their eyes showing a spark of excitement for the first time since the night we left the birthday party. I lingered at the door, watching them wander around Monica's small kitchen, where the scent of cinnamon from a fresh apple pie drifted through the air like a wordless welcome. That evening, just as I sat down on the sofa, my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it ring. On the third call, my father tried. I still didn't pick up. On the fourth call, it was Brandon. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering, holding the phone away from my ear as if his voice could taint the fresh air around me. "What game are you playing?" Brandon's voice was cold, without pretense. "I'm taking my children away from a toxic place," I said. "You know about my finances. If you tell anyone, especially mom and dad, I won't let it slide." A dry laugh escaped my throat. "Do you think I need threats to keep quiet? I don't even need apologies from this family, let alone exposing you." "Don't act so righteous," Brandon snapped. "You're always the victim, the poor single mother. Do you know how many people would kill for the chance to live with their parents like you did?" I cut him off. "You haven't been a father long enough to understand. But if one day Henry asks why his grandparents said he deserved to be in the basement because he wasn't Brandon's son, then you'll understand. And by then there won't be anyone left for you to blame." The line went silent. I hung up before he could answer. I left the sofa and stepped into the backyard, where Monica and my girls were picking apples that had fallen from the small orchard. Moonlight spilled across Lily's hair, making her seem to glow. Harper was animatedly explaining plant cell structures while Monica listened closely, asking questions as though she were a Real student. I leaned against the doorway, my heart settling like still water. Despite everything waiting ahead, work, rent, school, and the looming confrontation with my family's old beliefs, I felt that I was standing on solid ground. No more swallowing my voice for fear of disappointing someone. No more forcing my children into the mold of a family that never saw them with fairness. When Lily ran toward me, holding up a red apple, her face beaming, she exclaimed, "Mom, taste this, it's so sweet." Monica said this orchard used to belong to her grandmother. "This tree is over 30 years old." I bent down, took a bite, the crisp sweetness bursting on my tongue. Looking at my daughter, I pulled her into my arms. "I think we're starting something better." Our new house was tucked into a small alley near the hospital where I worked. The white walls were faded, the tin awning leaked after night rains, and the backyard barely fit an old wooden table and a few plants I'd salvaged from an abandoned garage. But to me, it was warmer than any place I'd lived since marriage. I bought a small wooden desk from the thrift market and set it in the corner of the living room for Lily to draw. Harper used the dining table as her station to assemble her recycled plastic robot. We didn't have many comforts, but every corner of the house carried laughter and a peace I thought had been lost forever. I rearranged my shifts at the hospital, took extra night shifts on Wednesdays and weekends, traded for Monday mornings off so I could walk the girls to school. The days stretched into 12-hour shifts, sometimes getting home close to midnight, legs aching, back sore. But each time I saw Lily's new painting taped to the fridge or Harper's robot testing its next move, I felt the exhaustion had meaning. One morning, as I poured coffee, Lily brought me a drawing. She had used warm colors to paint a small house at sunset, 3 figures smiling inside. I stared at it for a long time, then kissed her forehead. "This is our home, isn't it?" Lily nodded, her eyes shining. "I called it homecoming. My teacher said I'm using colors better now. See, I don't shake when I draw anymore." I held her hand and squeezed gently. "You can draw anything you want. Here, you have that freedom." Harper rushed in behind her, holding a tiny controller. "Mom, my robot can walk now. It even moves on the rug." She pointed to a small robot made of recycled plastic, moving slowly but steadily across the old carpet. I couldn't hide my amazement. "You built this all on your own?" Harper nodded proudly. "I learned in the robotics club at school. The older kids helped me wire the circuit. They said I have a good eye for problem solving." I pulled both of them close, holding them tight. Life wasn't easier, but at least it was ours. Free of impositions, free of scrutiny, free of anyone belittling us because of gender or birth order. We didn't have much, but enough to rebuild. Late at night after shifts, I reviewed old investment plans. Before leaving my parents' house, I had quietly purchased a minority stake in the apartment project Brandon was struggling to finish. The transaction was completely legal, done through a third party, and no one in the family knew. All the documents and contracts were stored neatly on a small USB hidden in my nightstand drawer. I hadn't bought in for revenge, but to protect myself. If one day Brandon dragged the family into debt, I would not allow my daughters' names to be tied to a failure they didn't cause. I needed a seat at the shareholder table. I needed to know what was happening with the project my parents had mortgaged their property for without once asking my opinion, though I bore the same Harris name. One Friday afternoon, while picking up Harper from school, her teacher pulled me aside. "Miss Adeline, I just want to say Harper is one of the most attentive and curious students in class. She's quick to find solutions." During the presentation on renewable energy, she was the only one who mentioned hydrogen fuel cells and applied it to an automated robot model. I thanked her, then stood watching Harper run toward the car, jacket slipping from her shoulder, chattering about adding light sensors to her robot. I couldn't help but laugh, my heart softening like autumn wind through an open window. At that exact moment, an email notification popped up. a notice for a temporary shareholder meeting from the real estate company tied to Brandon's project. The reason: construction delays and late deliveries. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at the Chicago branch office. I read carefully, sitting still for a long time. Since leaving my parents' house, I hadn't faced Brandon directly, but perhaps that time was near. I turned to see my daughters playing with the robot in the living room. Lily carefully glued patterns onto its body while Harper adjusted the legs for stability. I brewed tea, sat by the window in the old wooden chair, and let my heart feel as light as the music drifting from a neighbor's radio. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we had a beginning. Sometimes that was enough to spark a lasting fire in a mother's heart. One early winter morning, as I arranged a vase of dried lavender on the dining table, my phone buzzed nonstop. A message from Monica. "Did you read the news this morning? Brandon made the real estate pages." I opened my laptop, clicking on the financial news section. The bold headline read, "Harris Development halts South River Heights project after 3 major partners pull out. CEO Brandon Harris declines media response." I sat in silence. That project was the very one where I held minority shares. Each line confirmed what I had predicted: slow construction, unclear funding, constant design changes, workers complaining about late wages. It wasn't a surprise, just inevitable. A week later, another shareholder invitation arrived, this time for an emergency meeting. I told no one. Quietly, I bought a train ticket to the company's Chicago headquarters. Sitting in the back row, no one noticed the woman in a gray coat silently jotting notes each time numbers were discussed. Brandon stood at the podium, pale, hair disheveled, eyes unfocused. The arrogance was gone. His voice trembled as he spoke of restructuring funds and strategic partnerships with new investors. But in the end, no hands rose in support. An elderly shareholder stood. "We've lost too much money to your blind optimism. Empty promises don't build buildings. It's time you take responsibility." Brandon fell silent. I could feel the pride he once wore like armor cracking open. Under the lights, sweat dripped down his wrinkled shirt collar. When the meeting ended, I rose and walked out quietly. But before I reached the lobby, Rachel's voice called from behind. "Adeline." I turned. She was visibly thinner, dark circles carved deep under her eyes. "You came here to gloat, didn't you?" she asked, no longer with arrogance, only exhaustion and despair. I didn't answer right away. I held her gaze for a moment, then said softly, "I came because I'm a shareholder here. Family matters have nothing to do with it." Rachel stepped closer, her voice breaking. "Your mother had to pull from her savings to pay the contractors. Your father had to sell part of the farm he invested in. The whole family feels like it's drowning. Does that make you feel better?" I lowered my head slightly, as if bracing against the cold draft slipping down my collar, then spoke slowly. "I take no joy in seeing my family struggle. But I can't regret leaving a place that once made my daughters cry themselves to sleep, that belittled the efforts of its own blood." Rachel fell silent. She had nothing left to say. The next day, news spread across real estate forums and investor groups that Brandon had been officially suspended from his position as CEO. No one called him the gifted heir anymore, only a textbook example of cash flow mismanagement. Through Monica, I heard that Carol had been hospitalized for several days due to high blood pressure. Robert, the man who once threw me and my girls out of his house, now had to personally guarantee a bank loan to avoid foreclosure. The same people who once praised Brandon as the shining star of the Harris line now avoided even mentioning his name in board meetings. I didn't feel triumphant, but deep down, there was a strange lightness in me, as if an invisible rope that had tightened around my chest was finally being loosened knot by knot. not because they had fallen, but because I was no longer there to be buried with them. One evening, Lily was painting by the window. She asked softly, "Mom, have Grandma and Grandpa called you yet?" I shook my head gently, then sat beside her, brushing her hair with my hand. "They have a lot to deal with right now. But whether they come back or not, you and I still have each other. And no one will ever move Lily or Harper out of their own room again." She said nothing more, only leaned her head on my shoulder, her hand still holding the paintbrush mid-stroke. I looked up at the ceiling, where the warm light cast the faint shadow of the three of us on the wall. Not glamorous, not grand, but it was family. It was what I had chosen to protect with every ounce of strength I had, and I felt I had truly done the right thing. On a Sunday morning at the end of spring, sunlight spilled gently into our kitchen, newly lined with light granite counters. Harper was at the dining table, screwdriver in hand, assembling a new robot model, while Lily gazed out the wide window, watercolor paintings splashed across the wall beside her. The little house I had bought sat on the quiet northern edge of the city, full of trees, less than a 10-minute drive from the hospital. A year ago, it was just a line in my future goals list. Now it was where we lived, where we grew together. As I sipped my coffee, I scrolled through emails. At the top sat a message from the board of directors. "Congratulations, Doctor. Adeline Graham, effective June 1st, you are officially appointed as head of pediatrics." I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes for a few seconds. The feeling wasn't noisy excitement, but a ripened quiet. Every effort, the weary hospital shifts, the extra management courses, the choice to leave a house that was no longer a home had led to this moment. I didn't tell the girls right away. Over lunch, I simply said, "Next weekend I have a surprise for you." Harper squinted. "Does it have to do with robots, Mom?" Lily smiled. "I think we're going somewhere, aren't we?" I only laughed, saying nothing more. The following weekend, I took them to the lawyer's office. On the table lay the purchase contract for the house we had been renting for nearly a year. Monica, my dearest friend, the one who once sheltered us, was there as a witness. She squeezed my hand. "You've come so far." After signing, I turned to Lily and Harper. "This house, starting today, officially belongs to us." Harper's eyes widened. "Really, Mom? No more renting?" Lily whispered in awe. "So I can paint my room any color I want, right?" I nodded, eyes stinging. "As long as you paint it with love." That night, as the three of us painted the living room walls, the doorbell rang. Monica answered, then came back quietly. "Two people want to see you, Robert and Carol." I set down the roller, wiped my hands, and stepped out. Robert's back was slightly hunched, his hair much grayer. Carol clutched a small handbag, her eyes stripped of their old coldness. "May we come in, Adeline?" my mother asked, her voice softer than I had heard in years. I led them to the porch, not into the house. We sat on the wooden bench beneath the awning, the spot where I usually sipped tea while watching Lily water the plants. Robert spoke first. "We've thought a lot about everything, about how we treated you and the girls," Carol added, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't have had to shoulder so much alone. And the children, they didn't deserve what happened." I looked them in the eyes, no bitterness, no sharpness, only the resolve time had forged. "If you want to see the girls, I won't forbid it. But if you want to be part of their lives, it must begin with fairness and respect." Carol's tears fell. Robert nodded slowly. I stood, opened the living room window where Lily was giggling with Harper. "That is where my children live, learn, and are loved as they deserve. If you step into this house, you must see them with those same eyes." They said nothing more. But before leaving, Robert paused at the steps. "Thank you for not turning hurt into hatred." 2 weeks later, I attended a shareholder meeting at Harris Development, the stage that once belonged to Brandon. The South River Heights project was still under restructuring, and I, as the second largest shareholder, was there to review the new plan. Brandon walked in with freshly cut hair, a pressed suit, but eyes still shadowed by months of failure. When he saw me, he stiffened. "I thought you had pulled out." I smiled, setting a folder on the table. "I never did. The shares you thought were dissolved in restructuring, I bought them back through an investment fund." Brandon's breath quickened. You, you're the second largest shareholder?" I tilted my head. "And the one with enough voting power to demand full transparency of cash flow, or call for an internal audit." The room fell silent. I hadn't come for revenge. I came to protect what I once lost in that old house: fairness, clarity, and necessary boundaries. That evening, Lily handed me a new painting, three figures sitting in a flower garden, sunlight on their shoulders. I stared at it for a long time. Harper ran over, holding up her newly finished robot. "Mom, you name it." I wrapped my arms around both of them and whispered, "We're a team, and home is where we are." I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. In that little house, with Lily's art on the walls and Harper's robots scattered on the floor, I had found what I thought was lost for good: family. Not bound by blood, but built with kindness, love, and listening. If you've stayed with me this far, perhaps you too have witnessed or lived moments like mine, when family is no longer a place of return, but the place that wounds you deepest. Yet those very cracks can lead us to learn what love truly means. I'm not perfect. I stayed silent too long, swallowed my voice to keep peace, grew so weary I barely recognized myself. But when I looked into my daughter's eyes, I understood. If I didn't stand up, who would teach them that they deserve love the right way? And have you ever had to choose between keeping a house and keeping yourself? Have you ever been forced to leave in order to find peace for your children? I want to hear your story. Share your thoughts in the comments, because maybe your words will reach someone out there who needs a reason to take that brave step forward. And if this story stirred something in you, follow this channel to walk with me through more journeys of ordinary yet resilient people: mothers, fathers, children growing up in storms, yet holding on to warm hearts. I will keep telling stories of pain healed, of new homes built, and of the surprises life quietly brings. Because family, true family, is not where we're forced to endure, but where we have the right to be loved and to be ourselves.